The first time I touched her, my wife was screaming my name from the delivery room. That sounds worse than it was. Or maybe it sounds exactly like what it was. It was past midnight in a hospital in downtown Chicago. February. Snow pressed against the tall windows, and the whole maternity floor smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. I was 38, standing in socks on a cold tile floor, waiting to become a father. I remember thinking I should feel something bigger. Joy. Terror. Instead, I just felt tired. Numb in a way I had been for years. My marriage had been running on routine long before that night. We had done what was expected. Good jobs. Condo near the lake. Scheduled date nights. Therapy twice. We talked about the baby like it might fix something neither of us wanted to name. When the contraction hit hard, they told me to step out for a minute. My wife needed space. Needed the team. I nodded like a good husband and walked into the hallway, hands shaking a little. That was when I saw her. She was leaning against the nurse's station, flipping through a chart. Mid-40s maybe. Dark hair pulled back tight. No makeup except what a long shift leaves behind. Someone at the desk, a younger resident, joked that she should let the younger nurses handle labor because patients liked a fresher face. He said it under his breath but not quiet enough. She didn't react. Just kept reading. I don't know why it bothered me. It shouldn't have been my business. But I had spent years watching people dismiss steady, capable women once they hit a certain age. My wife complained about it too, how meetings felt different now, how younger hires were treated like upgrades. The nurse finally looked up and told the resident, calm and flat, that she had delivered more babies than he had attended classes, and if he preferred, he could explain that to the patient when things got complicated. The resident went quiet. I watched her then. Not because I found her attractive. Not yet. I watched because she didn't shrink. A few minutes later she walked toward me. She said my wife was progressing but it might be a long night. She asked if I was holding up okay. I told her I was fine. She looked at me in a way that suggested she did not believe me. She said fathers often looked more scared than the mothers. She said it gently, like she was giving me permission. I surprised myself by admitting I felt useless. I told her I kept thinking I should know what to do, and I did not. She said most men felt that way and that showing up was usually enough. She touched my forearm when she said it. Just a brief squeeze through my hospital bracelet and rolled shirt sleeve. It was simple. Professional. Human. But I had not been touched like that in a long time. Not without expectation. Not without history attached. Inside the room, my wife cried out again. The nurse stepped past me, and I followed. She moved with quiet confidence, adjusting monitors, speaking low and steady. At one point my wife snapped at her, said she wanted someone younger, someone more upbeat. It cut the air. The nurse did not argue. She said she understood and asked if my wife would prefer a different nurse. There was a pause. My wife shook her head and turned away. I saw something flicker across the nurse's face. Not anger. Just a small, practiced disappointment. Like she had heard it before. When another contraction hit, my wife grabbed my hand so hard my fingers went numb. The nurse guided us both. She told me where to stand, how to breathe with her, how to count. At one point I lost track and looked at the nurse instead of my wife. She caught my eyes and nodded once, grounding me. Hours blurred. Near dawn, after the baby finally cried and they placed him on my wife's chest, the room filled with noise. Doctors congratulated us. Machines beeped. My wife wept with relief. I stood there holding my son, overwhelmed in a way that finally felt real. The nurse adjusted the blanket around the baby. Our hands brushed again. This time neither of us pulled away immediately. She congratulated me. Said I did well in there. I almost laughed because I had done nothing except try not to fall apart. When she turned to leave, I felt a strange pull in my chest. Not lust. Not yet. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe? Of another person who knew what it meant to stand steady while everyone else unraveled. I told myself it was just adrenaline. Just a long night. Still, when she stepped out into the hallway, I followed her. I said I wanted to thank her properly. She told me it was her job, I said some people only did their jobs, and some people carried everyone else through them. She studied me for a second like she was deciding whether I meant it. Then she gave a small smile, and said her name was Elena. And without thinking too much about what it meant, I asked when her shift ended. Her shift ended at 7 that morning. I remember staring at the clock above the nurse's station like I was waiting for something important to be announced. My wife was asleep, our son in the clear bassinet beside her. The room was dim and warm. Machines hummed softly. I should have stayed there. I know that. Instead, around 6:45, I stepped into the hallway under the excuse of getting coffee. Elena was at the counter finishing notes. Her hair had loosened around her temples. She looked tired in a way that felt honest, not put together for anyone. I told her again that I appreciated what she had done. She said she had seen hundreds of births and that no one ever believed her when she said fathers were usually the ones who needed reassurance. I told her I probably looked pathetic out there. She said I looked like someone who cared. That stayed with me. There was a pause that felt longer than it was. Nurses moved past us. A cart squeaked down the hall. I almost walked away. Instead, I asked if she ever got breakfast after a shift. I said it casually, like it was a general question, not an invitation. She raised an eyebrow and said that was a dangerous habit to start with married men in hospital hallways. I felt my face get warm. I told her it was not like that. That I just wanted to sit somewhere quiet for a minute before going back into the room and becoming someone's father full-time. I said I felt like I had stepped into a different life overnight, and had not caught up yet. She studied me again. Not flirtatious. Careful. Then she said there was a diner across the street that served decent coffee and terrible eggs, and she only had 30 minutes before she needed to sleep. We did not touch as we walked. We did not walk too close. Snow crunched under our shoes. The sky was pale blue, almost fragile looking. Inside the diner, everything smelled like grease and syrup. We slid into a booth near the window. For a minute we just sat there, both quiet. It felt strange and oddly easy at the same time. She asked me how long my wife and I had been married. I told her 9 years. I said it the way people say numbers they have memorized. She nodded, like she could hear what I did not say. She mentioned she had been divorced for almost a decade. No kids. She had wanted them once. It had not worked out. She said it simply, without bitterness, but her fingers traced the rim of her mug while she spoke. I told her I was not sure when my marriage had started feeling like a partnership, and when it had turned into a project we were managing. She gave a small, knowing smile and said love sometimes got buried under logistics. There was no dramatic confession. Just small truths slipping out between sips of coffee. At one point I caught myself watching the way her hands moved when she talked. Strong hands. Steady. The same hands that had guided my wife through pain. I felt a pull I did not want to name. She must have sensed something shift because she leaned back slightly, and reminded me that I had a newborn upstairs. Her voice was gentle, but there was a boundary in it. I said I knew. I said I was not trying to be reckless. I did not feel invisible sitting there. I had felt invisible for a long time. That was when her expression softened. She said hospitals did strange things to people. Big moments stripped everything down. She said she had learned to be careful with connections that formed under fluorescent lights and adrenaline. I told her this did not feel like adrenaline. We sat with that. When her phone buzzed with a reminder alarm, she glanced at it and sighed. She said she needed sleep before her next shift. I nodded, suddenly aware that the morning had moved forward without asking us. Outside, the cold hit again. We stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. I asked if I could see her again. Not like this, I added quickly. Not in secret corners. Just coffee. Conversation. She hesitated. Then she said she did not date married men. It was a rule she had made after learning the hard way that lines blurred easily. I told her I understood. I said I was not asking for anything complicated. I just did not want the morning to be the last time we talked. She looked at me for a long moment, measuring something. Finally, she said if I ever needed advice about surviving the first weeks of fatherhood, she would not ignore a text. She pulled a pen from her pocket and wrote her number on the back of my hospital visitor sticker. She said that was all it was? Advice. I nodded like that was enough. We did not hug. We did not linger. She walked toward the train station, shoulders squared, like she had already put the moment away. I stood there a second longer than necessary, staring at the numbers on my sticker. Upstairs, my son started crying. I went back to my room and slipped into the chair beside my wife's bed. She asked where I had been. I told her I had needed air. That was true. What I did not say was that something inside me had shifted in a way I could not easily push back into place. 2 weeks after my son was born, I texted her. I told myself it was practical. My wife was exhausted. The baby cried in patterns none of the parenting books had warned us about. It felt safer to ask a nurse than to search online at 3 a.m. Elena responded an hour later. She said what we were experiencing sounded normal. She suggested skin-to-skin contact, dim lights, less panic in the room. She added that babies sense tension before adults admitted it. That last line stayed with me. The messages stayed harmless at first. Short. Focused. Advice about feeding schedules. How to let my wife sleep in blocks. How to not take every cry personally. By the end of the first month, the text stretched longer. She would ask how I was holding up, not just the baby. I would admit I felt like a guest in my own house. My wife moved through the apartment with quiet resentment, like I was already failing at something neither of us defined. We spoke about diapers and bills. Nothing else. Elena once said that new fathers often disappeared emotionally because they did not know where to stand. I told her I had been disappearing long before the baby. She did not respond right away to that one. By April, I found reasons to be near the hospital again. Pediatric checkups. Paperwork. I would time appointments loosely around her shifts. It was not calculated, at least not consciously. I just liked knowing she was somewhere in the building. The first time we met outside the hospital again, it was late afternoon. A coffee shop near the waterfront. Public. Neutral. She chose the table by the window. She looked different without scrubs. Dark sweater. Simple jeans. No effort beyond being herself. I noticed the lines around her eyes when she smiled. I liked them. We talked about ordinary things. Her brother in Milwaukee. My job in commercial real estate. The way Chicago winters felt endless until one random day in March when the air changed. At some point our knees brushed under the small table. Neither of us moved right away. I remember the exact moment the shift happened. She reached across to take a sip of my coffee by mistake. Our hands overlapped on the cup. It was brief, but it was not accidental. She pulled back first. She said we needed to be careful. I agreed. We both stared at the window instead of each other. After that, there were more meetings. Once every week or two. Always public. Always daylight. Always with an invisible line between us. By early summer, my marriage was no longer pretending. My wife told me she felt alone even when I was in the room. I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. We slept back to back. We spoke politely. We functioned like coworkers raising a child. One night after a quiet argument, I texted Elena that I thought my marriage might not survive the year. I deleted it twice before sending it. She called instead of texting back. Her voice sounded different on the phone. Softer. She told me she would not be the reason I left my wife. If I left, it had to be because it was already over. She said she had been the other woman once in her 30s and had promised herself never again. I told her she was not that. She said that did not matter. Appearances did. That was the first real obstacle. Not just my marriage. Her rules. Her dignity. By July, my wife and I started couples counseling again. It felt procedural. We said the right things. We tried. But when I pictured the next 10 years, I felt a heaviness I could not ignore. I did not touch Elena for months. Not beyond hands brushing. Not beyond brief contact when we greeted each other. Until the night everything blurred. It was late August. A heatwave that made the city feel restless. My wife had taken the baby to stay with her sister for the weekend after another argument that ended with both of us silent and exhausted. I texted Elena without thinking too much. I said I was alone and did not trust my thoughts. She hesitated. I could see it in the delay between messages. Then she said she would meet me, but only somewhere neutral. We ended up at her apartment anyway. I told myself I did not remember how that happened. The walk from the train. The elevator ride. The quiet hallway. But I remember the way her living room smelled faintly like lavender and clean sheets. We stood there too close. She said we should not do this. I agreed. Either of us stepped back. When she kissed me, it was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was careful at first, like we were testing the ground. Then it was not careful anymore. Her hands were firm on my shoulders. Mine found her waist like they had been there before. Months of restraint folded in on themselves. We moved to the bedroom without speaking. The air felt heavy. There was no performance. No fantasy. Just two people who had been holding tension too long. Afterward, we lay side by side, not touching for a few minutes. I stared at the ceiling and felt both relief and dread settle in at the same time. She turned toward me eventually, and said this changed everything. I knew she was right. In the quiet of her apartment, with the city humming outside the windows, I realized we were no longer pretending this was about coffee or advice. We had crossed something that would not uncross easily. By October, the air had turned sharp again. My wife and I had stopped pretending in counseling. We spoke plainly for once. She said she felt like she had been married alone for years. I told her I had felt the same. There was no shouting. Just exhaustion. We agreed to separate before the holidays, for the baby's sake as much as ours. I did not tell Elena right away. I wanted it to be real first. Final. Not something I said in the heat of wanting her. When I finally did tell her, we were sitting on a bench near the lake. The water was gray and restless. She had a thermos of coffee between her hands. I told her my wife and I had decided to separate. I said it was not because of her. That the marriage had been unraveling for a long time. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked if I was sure I was not just running towards something instead of away from something else. It was a fair question. I told her I had spent months trying to fix what was already hollow. I told her I did not want to build something new on top of dishonesty. I said I would move into a small apartment near Lincoln Park next month. She exhaled slowly, like she had been bracing for impact. We had been careful since August. Stolen nights. Controlled emotion. Always aware of the line we were standing on. But sitting there in open daylight, I felt something shift again. I told her I was tired of half measures. She looked at me, steady as always, and said she was not interested in being someone's rebound. She said she was 46 years old, and had rebuilt her life once already. She would not do it again for a man who might wake up in 6 months and regret everything. I told her I was not confused. She shook her head and said men often thought they were not confused until the paperwork was signed and the loneliness set in. There was a long pause. The wind pushed her hair loose around her face. Without thinking, I reached up and tucked it back behind her ear. My hand lingered there. She did not pull away. I said I had been lonely inside my marriage for years. I said what I felt with her was not adrenaline anymore. Not escape. It was steadiness. The way she looked at me like I was capable. The way she spoke to me like I was not disposable. She went quiet at that. Finally she said she had been called, past her prime, by a resident just last week. She said patients sometimes asked for younger nurses. She said even men her own age wanted someone 10 years younger, like time had not touched them the same way. She admitted she had started to believe maybe she was something temporary. Something convenient. I felt something tighten in my chest. I told her I did not see her that way. I told her I saw a woman who carried rooms on her shoulders and never demanded applause. I said I had never felt safer than I did in her kitchen at 2 in the morning. She searched my face like she was looking for doubt. I said I was in love with her. The words landed between us without decoration. No build-up. No poetry. Just truth that had been waiting. She closed her eyes briefly, like the sentence had weight. When she opened them, she said this could complicate everything. My divorce. Her job. The hospital. If anyone connected timelines, it would not look clean. I told her I knew. She asked if I was willing to be honest about us once my separation was public. No hiding. No quiet arrangements. I said yes. Another long silence. Then she said she loved me too. Not dramatic. Not breathless. Just certain. When she leaned into me, it felt different than August. Not stolen. Not reckless. We kissed slowly, like we were sealing something deliberate. We stayed there until the sun dipped lower and the cold crept into our coats. On the walk back to her car, she slipped her hand into mine openly for the first time. People passed us without interest. The city did not care. But to me, it felt like stepping into a new life without looking over my shoulder. For the first time, I was not choosing between escape and duty. I was choosing her. By the time my separation became official in November, the whispers had already started. Hospitals are smaller than they look from the outside. People talk. Shift patterns overlap. Someone had noticed how often I had been around during those early weeks. Someone had remembered seeing us at the diner across the street months later. Elena told me about it one evening in her kitchen. She was still in scrubs, leaning against the counter, arms crossed tighter than usual. A colleague had asked her, lightly but not lightly, if she had a new young admirer. Another had joked that she always did prefer complicated cases. She repeated it like it did not matter. But I saw the way her jaw set. I told her we would handle it the right way. That I would not let her reputation take the hit for something we both chose. 2 weeks later, we scheduled a meeting with hospital administration. Sitting in that small office felt more nerve-wracking than any client negotiation I had ever handled. I explained that my wife and I were legally separated. That our relationship had developed after that decision. I kept my voice steady. Elena sat beside me, calm as ever. HR asked about timelines. About professionalism. About whether she had ever been assigned directly to my family's ongoing care. She had not. She made that clear. It was uncomfortable. Necessary. Honest. When we left the office, Elena squeezed my hand once in the parking garage. She said transparency was better than secrecy. Even if it stung. The gossip did not stop immediately. Anonymous emails appeared in her inbox. Questions about her judgment. Comments about her age. One message suggested she must be desperate to settle for a newly separated man. She showed me that one. I felt anger rise in a way I had not felt in years. Not loud anger. Focused anger. She surprised me by saying maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should transfer hospitals. Maybe it would be easier if we slowed things down. I told her I would not let cruelty make decisions for us. She looked tired. She said she had worked too hard for her position to have it reduced to a rumor. She did not want to be the story people whispered about in break rooms. That was when I realized loving her meant more than just wanting her. It meant standing beside her when it was inconvenient. Around the same time, my own work life shifted. I had been overlooked for a senior role twice before. Quiet. Reliable. Not flashy enough. But that winter, I pushed harder. I took on a complicated redevelopment project in West Loop that no one else wanted. Late nights. Detailed planning. Meetings that drag on. I did not do it to prove something to strangers. I did it because I was tired of being the safe background character in my own life. By March, the project closed successfully. It brought in more revenue than expected. At the quarterly meeting, my name was mentioned without qualifiers for the first time. No jokes about my steady nature. Just results. A few weeks later, I was promoted. When I told Elena, she smiled in that quiet way she does when she is proud but does not want to overwhelm the moment. She said she had always known I was capable of more than I allowed. Back at the hospital, something shifted too. The noise softened. Not disappeared. But softened. Elena continued to work the hardest cases. Complicated deliveries. Emergency situations. Doctors who had once joked about her age now asked directly for her when things got tense. Skills speaks eventually. One night, after a particularly long shift where she had helped stabilize a critical patient, a younger nurse publicly thanked her during handoff. It was small. But it mattered. We began to feel less defensive and more grounded. There were still looks sometimes. But there were also nods of respect. One evening, sitting on my couch while my son slept in the next room during my custody weekend, Elena admitted she had been afraid I would retreat once things got uncomfortable. That I would choose ease over her. I told her I had done that in my marriage for years. Avoided hard conversations. Chosen quiet over truth. I was not going to do that again. She leaned into me then, resting her head against my shoulder. The apartment was dim. The only sound was the soft hum of the baby monitor. We had faced the official meeting. The whispers. The doubt. We were still there. And for the first time, it felt less like we were defending something fragile and more like we were building something solid. By the following fall, our lives had found a rhythm that felt less like damage control and more like something intentional. Elena did not move in right away. We were careful. My divorce finalized in early spring, and I signed a lease renewal on my place in Lincoln Park with the idea that stability mattered, especially with a toddler going back and forth between homes. She started staying over on weekends when my son was with his mother. Quiet nights at first. Cooking simple dinners. Falling asleep on the couch halfway through a movie. It felt ordinary in a way that surprised me. The first time she met my son, it was in a park, neutral ground. I remember being more nervous than during the HR meeting. She crouched down to his level and introduced herself like she would to any small patient, calm and respectful. She did not try to impress him. She let him decide how close to stand. By the end of that afternoon, he was showing her rocks he had collected near the lake. It was slow. That was important to both of us. By summer, she had a drawer at my place. Then a shelf in the bathroom. Small signs that she was not visiting anymore. She was part of the space. We talked about the future in practical terms. Finances. Custody schedules. Her hospital contract. My promotion meant longer hours some weeks. We did not romanticize any of it. We just laid it out. One evening in September, after my son had fallen asleep in his room, we sat at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of wine. The windows were open. The city noise drifted in softly. She said she was tired of living between places. Tired of always packing a bag. I asked if she was saying what I thought she was saying. She nodded once. We did not make it dramatic. We decided she would move in at the end of the year when her lease ended. No rush. No secret. Just a decision. Living together was not fireworks. It was toothbrushes side by side. Her early morning alarms before dawn shifts. Me making coffee while she tied her hair back in the kitchen mirror. It was her leaving sticky notes on the fridge about milk. It was me folding her scrubs with the rest of the laundry. We argued sometimes. About space. About how to discipline my son consistently. About my tendency to shut down when stressed. But the arguments did not feel like the slow erosion I had known before. They felt like 2 adults trying to build something that worked. Professionally, she was offered a leadership role on the maternity floor that winter. Charge nurse. It came with more responsibility and more visibility. She hesitated, worried that the attention would bring fresh scrutiny. I told her she had earned it. Not because she was with me. Not because she had endured gossip. Because she was the best at what she did. She accepted. The night she told me officially, she stood in our living room holding the email on her phone like it might disappear. I pulled her into me without thinking. She laughed into my shoulder. The proposal was not what I once imagined proposals looked like. It was late. Snow outside again, almost a year since the night we met. My son was asleep down the hall. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old photos she had brought over from her apartment. I was watching her, thinking about how much had shifted in 12 months. The hospital hallway. The diner. The HR office. The anonymous emails. The park bench. I did not get down on one knee. I sat beside her and told her I did not want to build the rest of my life around temporary arrangements. I told her I wanted her there when my son graduated kindergarten. When I turned 50. When her hair went fully gray and she pretended not to care. I said I wanted to marry her. She looked at me for a long second. Not shocked. Not overwhelmed. Just quiet. Then she asked if I was sure I was not choosing her because she had held me steady during a storm. I told her I was choosing her because she had shown me what steady could look like when it was mutual. Her eyes softened in that way I had come to recognize. She said yes. No fireworks. No audience. Just the two of us on a hardwood floor, surrounded by half-sorted photographs and the sound of the city outside. It felt exactly right. We got married on a cold afternoon in early spring. Not at a hotel ballroom. Not at the hospital chapel people kept suggesting with half smiles. We chose a small bookstore in Wicker Park that hosted quiet events after closing. Exposed brick. Wooden shelves. Folding chairs set up between fiction and biography. There were maybe 30 people there. My parents. Her brother and his wife. 2 of my closest friends from work. A few nurses who had stood by her when the gossip was loudest. Even one of the younger doctors who had once made a careless comment about her age showed up and shook her hand with genuine respect. My son wore a tiny navy blazer and refused to stand still for photos. Elena wore a simple ivory dress that fit her like it had been made for her, and no one else. No heavy makeup. Her hair down for once. I remember thinking she looked exactly like herself. Not younger. Not trying to be anything other than what she was. That felt important. The ceremony was short. The officiant was a friend of hers from nursing school. We stood facing each other while the city moved outside the front windows. When it was my turn to speak, I did not recite anything elaborate. I told her I had first seen her in a hospital hallway holding everything together while someone else tried to diminish her. I told her I had admired her long before I had loved her. I promised that I would not let the world shrink her when I could stand beside her instead. She listened without looking away. When she spoke, she said she had not expected to fall in love again. That she had built a good life on her own and had accepted that might be enough. She said loving me had not made her smaller or secondary. It had made her braver. She promised to keep choosing honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. There were no dramatic tears. Just steady voices. We exchanged rings. My son clapped too early and everyone laughed. It broke the tension in the best way. Afterward, we pushed chairs aside and shared food from a local Italian place down the street. Wine in paper cups. People talking between shelves of novels. It felt warm. Human. At one point I noticed 2 of the nurses who had once warned Elena to be careful standing together, watching us. One of them caught my eye and nodded slightly, like she had revised her opinion. That meant more than I expected. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left, Elena and I stood alone near the front window. The bookstore owner was stacking chairs in the back. She said quietly that there had been a time when she thought she would always be the woman men left when something easier appeared. I told her there had been a time I thought I would always be the man who stayed quiet and let life decide for him. We both smiled at that. Walking out onto the sidewalk as husband and wife did not feel like a grand finale. It felt like stepping into something steady. Earned. We had not ignored the complications. We had walked through them. And now we were standing there, not as a scandal, not as a rumor, but as a family. Sometimes I think back to that hospital hallway. To the smell of disinfectant. To the sound of my wife calling my name from behind a closed door. To Elena standing there, steady while someone tried to make her feel smaller. If I had looked down at my phone instead of up at her, none of this would have happened. I learned that loneliness does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet marriage. A good job. A life that checks the right boxes but feels thin when you lie awake at night. I also learned that courage is rarely loud. Sometimes it is just asking, "Are you okay?" and meaning it. Sometimes it is walking into an HR office and telling the truth even when it might cost you. Sometimes it is choosing someone in daylight instead of hiding them in the dark. Elena once told me she thought she had aged out of being chosen first. Watching her now, running a floor full of nurses, coming home tired but certain of her place, I know how wrong that belief was. Love did not rescue us. It required us to be honest about who we were, and who we had been avoiding becoming. If there is anything I understand now, it is this: you are not too late. Not too old. Not too steady. Not too damaged. One moment. One decision to step forward instead of back. That is sometimes all it takes to change the direction of your life.